right, everyone. Welcome to the Stoa. Today we have Adrienne Maree Brown. Adrienne is an activist, social justice facilitator, doula, and author of many books, such as Pleasure Activism, The Politics of Feeling Good, We Will Not Cancel Us, and Other Dreams of Transformative Justice. And this book, which is the title of today's session, Emergent Strategies, Shaping Change and Changing Worlds. So how today is going to work, we have Adrienne for about 40 minutes. So if you have any questions, throw them in the chat now, and I'll warm up Adrienne with some questions. And if you have any, I'll call on you. You can unmute yourself, ask your question. If you don't want to be on YouTube, just indicate that in the chat and I'll read your question on your behalf. So that being said, Adrienne, welcome to the Stoa.
Thank you for having me.
So people who visit the Stoa are pretty eclectic, and it's a pretty memetically diverse crowd, but the through line is having a sensitivity to emergence and applied complexity. And I imagine a bunch of people here right now are familiar with your work, and I imagine some people are just discovering you for the very first time. And I'm really excited to onboard those people who are new to you to your work. So I'm curious, and this might be a bit much to ask, but any current elevator pitch that you have for Emergent Strategies? I know you mentioned a few in 23, but is there any new ones that have emerged since?
The main thing I say about Emergent Strategy is that it's about getting in right relationship to change. The change is inevitable, and we struggle with the humility it takes to get in right relationship with it. But everything about Emergent Strategy is just being in that practice of like change is happening, it's coming, you're in it, you can shape it. Yeah. And what does that relationship really look like?
Could you expand on right relationship, what it means for you?
Yeah, I first heard it from Indigenous communities I was working with when I was at the Ruckus Society doing nonviolent direct action and civil disobedience training. And it was this idea that everything is in relationship with everything else. And I kept thinking about that there's a relationships between all things that are alive, all things that are in care and aid and support of each other. And that part of what Western culture does is it gets us into these relationships of transaction that can be very toxic, and in relationships where we try to simplify what is complex, or trying to make a binary out of a fluid system. And so that idea of being in right relationship is a relationship where there's mutuality, where there's accountability, where things can actually flow. And I'm really interested in what it would look like for us as a species to be in right relationship with the planet, which means that instead of enforcing a kind of human supremacy where everything on this planet is meant for us to eat it and extract it and use it and put concrete over it. And instead, what does it look like to be in a relationship of listening, caring, nourishing, mutuality? What does it look like to be in a relationship of mutuality with the planet?
And for those who haven't read the book, I'll put in the chat the 9 core principles. These are wonderful. I'll just read some. Small is good, small is all, change is constant, be like water, less prep, more presence. And one that is salient for me right now, perhaps because I was just reading your article, Love of the Fittest. I haven't finished it, but it's quite good. Is that move at the speed of trust. And one of the themes at the Stoa is what I'll call memetic mediation. There's people with viewpoints of what is and what ought to be. It's just radically different, like to the point where it's even hard to even start a conversation that's based off trust or love. And I think what you said in that article, I wrote down, we're in a period of peak socialized distrust. And so how do you show up when you're in the presence of such like so with someone or a group of people where that memetic divide is sharp, and do you have any recommendations how we could show up in it?
Well, I think one of the first things is, for me, I had to do work on rebuilding trust with myself. Um, a lot of what is given to us as education is actually teaching us not to trust ourselves. Right now, my sweetheart is a first grade teacher, and she's like in a school situation where she's like, oh yeah, like I trust these kids if they tell me they need to go to the bathroom. And the common culture of the school is kids need to wait till this time to go to the bathroom, or you need to go through this kind of jumping through hoops to go to the bathroom. And these kids are different. These kids have spent their entire lives so far being at home, go to the bathroom whenever they needed to go to the bathroom. So a simple thing like that, right? Can you trust yourself to know when you need to go to the bathroom, or when you're hungry, or when you're thirsty, when you feel angst, when you feel angry, when you don't feel like you're part of what the group is doing, when you actually feel belonging or not feeling belonging, like all of that is getting socialized and deconstructed inside of the educational system. So for me, the first thing is always making sure that I can actually listen to the different signals that are popping off inside of me. When I come into a space where there's a divide, um, there's an instinct towards belonging that's like, figure out which side you belong to and go there. As a facilitator, I'm always trying to notice that and then stay wide. Like, oh, how can I actually be wide enough that all the different perspectives in this room can breathe? They don't all have to be right, but the people who are holding them should still be able to take a deep breath and say, here I am with my distinct belief system. And the teaching from nature that really helps me with this is biodiversity, right? That in nature, the healthiest ecosystems are the ones that have the most biodivergent coexistence. And humans are one of the rare species where we're like constantly trying to figure out, like, how do we get everyone to think one way, be one way, act one way, lockstep into something that's actually not healthy. I think so much of what's happening in our society right now is that people are trying so hard to be something they're not, which is unattainable, instead of living deliciously and delightfully into exactly what is themselves, and then figuring out what is the divergent community that feels right to that realized self. And again, I come back to children, because children, before we start breaking their spirits, children are so confident and being themselves. They're like, I'm pooping. Like, poop is what's happening right now. It's interesting to me. That's what's happening. And I'm just like, guy, there's no shame. And when shame enters the picture, it kind of distorts the whole human experience. Okay. So yeah, I try not to feel shame when I'm in a space, and I try to stay wide. I stay as broad as I can.
And I was thinking and writing and feeling into the culture war around the COVID situation, what you were writing about in Love of the Fittest,
Yeah.
and taking on the perspective, not just on a propositional lens, but in an embodied lens, and feeling what people feel, whether they're afraid of dying from a virus or they're afraid of losing their freedoms. It's like the commonality is fear right there.
Yeah.
And I loved how you worded it. It's like a cry for help sometimes, some of these perspectives that come out.
Yes.
Um, and so how do you get into right relationship with your own fear and then other people's fear in those settings?
Well, one thing is I normalize, right? Like, I'm like, it's normal to be fearful in the face of things that are unknown. And it's normal to be fearful in the face of massive changes where the things that you feel comfortable with are not available to you anymore, or might not be available to you anymore. Right now, I feel like if humans don't feel fear about the future, I think they're not really paying attention to the patterns that are unfolding. And I'm like, we should be um, fearful, not because the earth can't recover. I don't feel scared on behalf of the earth. I feel like the earth is just going to be like, we tried it, humans. We're not compatible. Y'all are abusive. And I had to let you go through a series of hurricanes and fires. But I feel like as a human, I'm like, oh, I feel fearful on my behalf, and I feel fearful on the behalf of generations to come. Um, I think what helps me counter fear is faith. And what I think is really interesting right now is the arguments people are having are rooted in different faith systems. So if you have faith in like an omnipotent spiritual force to protect you, then it's hard to have faith in science and data and what people are figuring out. And if you have faith in science and data and, like information and experiments and hypotheses and tests, it can be hard to also have faith in a larger omnipotent spiritual force. And what's been helping me is to recognize in me that I feel like all that created the complexity of the earth is working through the science and the data and the information. So for me, I don't feel that they're at odds. I feel that they're in an interesting dance with each other. I feel like science is a very faithful act, putting a hypothesis out and testing it and looking and seeing what the results are. All of that is a dance. And you have to be willing to acknowledge when some new information comes along that changes the results or changes what you understand the situation to be. But I think the force of the divine moves through everything that's happening, including the resistance, including the mistakes, including the harms. There's something that we are figuring out. And mushrooms, I think, are a great teacher of this. There's some of them that are poisonous and some of them that communicate about poison and protect. And there's some that process toxin and get rid of it. And I think we haven't figured out, we haven't quite figured that out for our human system yet. So far, when harm gets generated, we keep cycling it. We're like, oh, harm, let's cycle that back. And we just get into more and more and more of it. And we create petri dishes for it, right? So it's like the prison system is a petri dish of harm systems, right? We're like, oh, you did violence. We're going to put you around a lot of other people who did violence, and we're going to sharpen and hone that capacity of violence. And you're going to have to try to protect your humanity in an environment that is actually a tightly packed container full of violence all around you. And I've been really excited as an abolitionist. I've been working with a lot of people who are incarcerated and being in conversation with people who are incarcerated and learning, oh, how hard it is to hold on to their humanity inside of that container. I think we have a lot to learn from people who are doing just that. But I think that that's the response, is like, how do we create containers where people can test their faith in other ways? How do we create containers where people can begin to understand that the divine works through us and not just on behalf of us? I also think the humility is like my favorite thing when it comes to fear, is I'm just like, it's not all about me. And I was raised, my grandfather was an evangelical Christian. And we were smiling today because my sister just found a book that he gave every single person this book of promises from the Bible. It was like 7,000 promises from the Bible. You would give it over to people. And I was raised with that idea that you pray to a specific God for specific things and you should get those things. And growing up has been a humbling process of those prayers not being answered. And then, later being like, thank God that prayer wasn't answered. I was not supposed to be with that person, or I wasn't supposed to have that thing. Like I would have never gotten to this level of liberation if I had landed in that answered prayer. And so there's something about the humility of being like, perhaps everything is all going according to plan, and I don't know that plan. And I need to play my role. And my role is to wonder what the plan is. And that's part of all of it. And that's okay. So I'm a curious one. That's my work in this planet, is to stay curious. And fear, if I can get curious about it, is always trying to teach me what I care about. I don't feel fear if I don't care, right? Like when I don't care about something, I'm just like, I don't know, burn it down. Who cares? But I care so much about the children in my life. I care so much about this planet. I care so much about my community. I care so much about my parents. COVID-19 really got me clear. Like, I really care about some of these motherfuckers. Like, I really care. And I don't want them to die. And I'm going to fight for them to get the masks and get the vaccines and get everything. I'm going to fight for it because I'm terrified of losing them. And if I can take that step to be like, oh, this is love. I love this person. And can I love them without trying to control them? Masterclass stuff. We'll see. I'm working on it.
Yeah, I really vibe and love that. It seems like those who currently have the capacity to process fear and view it as sort of like a friend giving advice rather than something to eliminate from your body have the chance to create that synthesis from the
Yeah.
perspectives that are
Oh,
existing.
yes.
Um, so yeah, let's get some voices in here.
Okay.
Uh, AJ Bond, I'll call on you. We're not going to call on everyone in order. We might not get to everyone, but AJ, if you can ask the first question.
Yeah, I love this discussion about can I love someone without changing them? And I feel like that's sort of what my question is about. I'm really struggling with the trust piece, and I'm wondering
Uh-huh.
if you can unpack your position on trust more, because I want to be in acceptance and I want to be open and I want to trust people. But then I also want to be sort of fighting for change that I think is positive.
Yeah.
And I'm not entirely sure how to be in right relationship with that polarity.
Yeah. I mean, I think this is our most important work, really, in some ways, is figuring this piece out, because it's like we're not actually individuals. A friend of mine, Gopal Dayanini, says the smallest unit we have is actually our relationships. Like we're never actually floating about by ourselves. So it's like the quality of the relationships matters. And I first heard the move at the speed of trust from my friend Mervyn Marcano, and it stopped me in my tracks, that I was like, I've been moving at the pace of production because I was socialized inside of capitalism. And so just like you're always moving as fast as you possibly can, everything is always urgent. And just the idea that there was a different pace, one that you could breathe in, and one where trust actually mattered, it transformed the way I facilitated. And so what I started paying attention to was the connection between all these different people. And wherever there was distrust, there was usually a story that needed to be told, a request that needed to be made, an emotion that needed to be revealed. Um, the truth was right there in that place. The distrust is also our intuition trying to tell us something is not known here that needs to be known for us to be able to move forward. And the other teacher on trust that I turn to over and over again, and is in Emergent Strategy, is Lao Tzu in the Tao Te Ching. And the way that Lao Tzu initially wrote this verse, or at least the way it's translated most commonly, is if you don't trust the people, they become untrustworthy. And the way that I flipped that for the book was if you trust the people, they become trustworthy. Again, hypothesis. I was like, let's try this. And what I found was that's true if you have an endless amount of time. Everyone eventually does get there or they die, right? So that's there. But then for groups of people, and especially now, when it's like I have a limited amount of time, I'm gonna die. There's a limited amount of time that I'll be able to do a work, or that maybe there's a limited amount of time I have on a project. The addendum that I've started to add to that is trust the people and they'll become trustworthy, or the boundaries will become clear. And my friend Prentice Hemphill offered us this really brilliant quote last year. Boundaries are the distance at which I can love you and myself simultaneously. And I really appreciate that in juxtaposition with this work around trust, because the idea is I can't change people. And when I say I'm offering my trust to people, I'm not saying I trust you to become my standard for you. It's I trust you to continuously be growing and learning, and I trust you to have integrity in your communication with me about that. And integrity for me is really what you say and what you do are aligned with each other, right? My pet peeve, or like my biggest turnoff, is when people say one thing and do something else. And I'm like, if you do that once and I name it and I notice it, there's another chance. If you keep doing that, then eventually it's like, I don't think trust is actually going to be possible for us in the time that we have available. And we just need a boundary. Boundaries are terrifying in our society right now. We want everything to be amorphous. We're being surveilled constantly. It's very hard to just say, actually, I want a line in which I can experience myself and I can trust that no one is crossing over into that space, or I want a line at which I can feel safe. I want a line at which I can feel like what's, for me, often it's just like, I want a line at which I can feel like I can move through my day without disruption, right? I've had conditions and relationships in my past where it was like the power someone had was to disrupt my day, disrupt my purpose, take me away from my calling. And I had to like fight my way back. I'm not interested in those kind of relationships. So for me, that boundary is often, I'm like, you can go be a disruptive mess over there. And the people who are around me, I trust to honor their own callings and honor my calling. And that if we disrupt each other, it's because it's something legitimately like we just lost someone, or we're going through, this world has plenty of real legitimate suffering that we have to support each other through. And there are some people whose suffering is so deep inside themselves that they can't be honest about what's actually causing the suffering. And so they bull in the china shop. They're just knocking everything else over. I'm trying to think if there's anything else there. I think in our organizational systems, like in the places where we're working, we need to support each other to get the help, the actual right kind of help. I feel like I've often been facilitating meetings where I'm like, oh, you need a therapist, like a personal therapist, just to work with you on some stuff. Or you guys, this whole group needs a patriarchy training. And there's nothing that I can magically pull off as a facilitator. It's going to build trust between this group of feminists and this group of patriarchs, right? Like there needs to be a cultural commitment to a different belief system. So to me, that's one of the fun things you get to do as someone who's creating and holding space and holding change processes, is figuring out, is this interpersonal? Is this systemic? Is this ideological? Is this trauma? Is this healing? Like, what's actually happening here, and how do we apply the right medicine?
Any follow-up shares, AJ? And AJ's the shame educator here at the Stoa. He's released a book on shame. Just wanted to mention that. Imagine the questions are coming from that spirit.
Just to say that was really helpful. And what's really hitting me from what you said is that I think I've been holding trust as like 100% trust. And now I'm seeing like, right, there's a gradient in which you can have boundaries and different types of trust at different distances. So that's really inspiring. So thank you.
Well, and I appreciate you saying that, because there's also, I think we tend, again, to binarize this where it's like, I am an innocent, good, honest person trying to move through a world of evil liars. And, who's going to meet the trust-o-meter that I have, right? And it's like, we're all liars. We're all mess. We all perpetrate harm. We're all participating in this system. If you're paying taxes, you're a warmonger. Like, we're all fucking a mess. Once that, to me, it's just like, let that in. You are not that great. You're miraculous, but you're not perfect. We're all figuring it out. And like, I lie. And then I have to get curious. Why did I lie? Why didn't I say what I actually wanted to happen there? And sometimes it's still really small. Do you want to go to this movie? Sure. Right? No, I don't want to go to that movie. I want to go sit in the bathtub and like have a spliff and just like zone out. But why? Oh, I want that person to know I care about them. And like, I want to sometimes do what they want to do. And this is hard stuff, especially for Virgos. So I just feel like being in all of that, like humanity, the more you're with your own humanity, I find trust to be easier in that space. And in pleasure activism, I reference this thing called, what is it? I think a relationship anarchy. Have you heard of this? Yeah. Where they talk about like, instead of having trust as this like final hurdle in intimate process, why don't you begin with trust and then assume trust and keep returning to trust? And that again, is like a big, oh, right? Like, we're all human beings. We're all figuring this out. I don't have to assume someone is trying to screw me over or lie to me or disrupt my organization. And then if I see behaviors like that, I'm like, how do we get back to good? And if we can't get back to good, then we set the boundary, which is a very different way to approach it all. Yeah. And it's not just Virgos, it's all earth signs. Everyone's a mess.
Thanks, AJ. I was going to save this question for the last, but we might run out of time, so I'll ask it, or Tegan Colty now to ask it.
Hi.
Hi.
Hello. You and your work are so important to who I am and who I've become and who I'm becoming, that the prospect of asking you a question became its own growth journey, its own ecosystem. It made its way into a ton of conversations I had. And the challenge of getting a big and specific question, I did not get clarity on until yesterday when I was grieving in Lake Michigan. And so much of that clarity came through like a beacon, because I learned from Emergent Strategy that the questions people ask often reveal things about themselves.
Yes.
And so the question that came through for me was, what are you longing to be asked?
Mm-hmm. Mm. Well, first of all, I just want to affirm your journey, you know. And look, now you've done it. You've asked me a question, and that is in your back pocket forever. It's a good question. I feel like I'm always longing to be asked what I'm practicing right now. I'm in this moment where my thoughts have been all about controlling the future and trying to fix the future for so long. And something is really unlocking and unleashing in me about landing in the now and getting really present and figuring out like what I practice moment by moment. Like I'm just getting so much more interested in the present moment. And there's this quote from Octavia that is, someone sent me this little broadsheet, baby broadsheet of it. It says, tomorrow is the child of today. And I'm thinking about that all the time, that I'm like, oh, like, it's not like some mythical future people are going to emerge that are somehow better than us. It's that we are going to start practicing new things into our system until those become the cultural norms. And that is daunting, you know, like I'm like, it's so much easier to critique like large corporations than to actually commit myself to not traveling, right? Or commit myself, you know, I just got an electric car. I'm basically putting a travel ban on myself. I'm slowly realizing that the wisdom I have to offer the world is not a carbon offset for me traveling. It clicked finally. I'm like, oh, and you know, it's not, I know it's not all individual behaviors. Like I get that. And I also know that there's a tipping point of individual behavior that becomes collective behavior that becomes new norms. And I think there's a way that those of us who are like, I see all the things, can really think that just saying we see all the things is enough of a contribution. We're like, I went on Twitter and I told people about themselves all day. I'm like, that's who cares? Like in 4 generations, when people are really struggling for water because of the consequences of what we're done now. I don't want to look someone in the eyes as an ancestor, you know, a little ghost or whatever, and be like, I tweeted about it. Like, I know that will not be satisfying to me. So I need to make sure that every, you know, like I'm really looking at everything, every small choice I'm making, and then how do I use whatever visibility comes in my lifetime to highlight for others, you know, this is possible. This is also possible. This is also a way. Like I would love that to be a part of my legacy, is that like, oh, Adrienne put a travel ban on herself and her organization. And then a lot of other social justice movements were like, yeah, we don't need to travel. Like we don't need to fly everywhere. And then the movement, social carbon footprint went, you know, down. And then that set some cultural shift, right? That would be great. So yeah. And then I love when people ask me about my turtle.
I didn't know you had a turtle. Will
Yes.
you tell us about your turtle?
I have my partner identifies very much as a turtle, and about a month and a half into our relationship, we got a tortoise shipped to us in the mail because someone online had seen that she loved turtles and tortoises, and they had been like DMing to each other, and they were like, do you want a tortoise for your birthday? And the tortoise came, and it was this big, like fit in the palm of our hands, and it's now already this big. And it's about to turn 2. And it's, yeah, I learned so much from our tortoise. It's all about like, life goes slowly, make sure you have enough food, and you can forget so much and still make good connections in the world. Like they don't seem to remember how many times they've walked in the same circle, but each time is brand new and they're having a blast. And yeah, they're really sweet. It's like you can have a really loving relationship with something that lives in a shell. And that's good for me to know, because I'm like, I'm learning a lot about boundaries. They're very clear. Like, I don't like that touch, like, I'm like, I could do that. I can do that. Yeah. Tortoise love is very real.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Maggie, you had a question.
Yeah, hi, Adrienne.
Hi.
It's such a pleasure to meet you. Your book is on our next book club list, Pleasure Activism. So I'm really looking forward to digging into it. My question was for you and your identity and history as an activist and Black feminist, and how you lovingly interact, or maybe not so lovingly, with those who refuse to engage in good faith, to really understand the lived experiences and perspectives of those who experience structural and systemic oppression. Like, how do you decide when to fight, when to disengage, when to convince otherwise? And given your orientation earlier of, trust, while also maybe not knowing the universe has certain plans, I'm also curious if your like emergent change is inclusive of revolution, or is it all a really peaceful kind of collaborative co-emergence of shared viewpoints?
It's definitely revolution. It's definitely revolution. I mean, I think that I'm a post-nationalist, and a lot of my political beliefs as I have aged have been, I actually don't want to spend my life fighting for recognition or fighting for someone else to decide that they honor my humanity. I spend very, very, very little time with people who that's their starting point, is like, I'm superior to you in some way. I'm like, there's nothing in me that can really respond or interact with that. And I think that what we're moving towards, I think the way the whole earth and the whole world is moving, is that those who are interested in figuring out how we collaborate and survive together, like those will be the fittest. That will be who makes it. And that will be people with disabilities, and that will be people with different identities, and that will be people from all kinds of class backgrounds. But the thing that will be shared is a willingness to be a part of a mycelial network of humans who are surviving. A willingness to relinquish the aspect of individuality that is that creates isolation. And I think right now is actually this really fascinating moment for that, because we continue to give care, deep care, to people who are choosing not to get vaccinated. And we're seeing what's happening is that they're not surviving, right? And it's a matter of free will. They get to make this choice to not survive, and we get to work to keep them alive as long as we can. But it's also a really interesting thing to say, like, well, there's just so much grief around it, and massive change. It's a massive, massive change. Like this week, I think the numbers came out that is 1 in 500 Americans have now died from COVID. And around the world, the numbers vary, but they're high. It's extremely high. And I think a common trait amongst those who are not making it is that commitment to that individual right to make a decision even if it's at odds with a collective capacity to move forward through time. And I think we have a lot of moving forward through time to do together that's going to require a lot of collective thinking, which means we have to learn how to do that. It's really hard to do collective thinking with people that you find inferior to you, right? Like if you're like the whole time, you're like, oh, you're Black and there's no way you know what to do. I'm like, it's going to be really hard for you to hear what really great information I have about like the things I know, which is like being a doula or facilitating spaces and caring for kids, things like that. Likewise, it's not really smart for me to be closed off to someone, just look at them and be like, well, you're an older white man, you must be this or racist or whatever. I'm like, I don't know that by looking. Like, I need to keep my heart open. I need to keep myself open to the collective that might be speaking through that body, right? And so that's one thing I really pay attention to, is not letting the mythology of racism, the mythology of ableism, the mythology of classism, the mythology of sexism actually stay stuck in my mind as a real thing. Like, I'm like, someone made that shit up and they made it up to dominate. That experiment has failed. There's nobody who's dominating me. What I do want to do now is be in relationship with people who love me and who I can love, right? Like, who is that shadow person? What's going on over there, Columbine? That's amazing.
Yeah, that's my son.
Hi, son. Wow, that's amazing. Like, it looks like you've traveled here from another dimension. I'm really into it. I did that. Awesome. Anyway, yeah, that's like, I forgot the question, but I hope that's useful. I do tell people this, like, please don't get on Twitter and spend all your time arguing with strangers who tell you that you're not as good as they are. Like, it's not worth your time, right? It really isn't. If you're in conversation with someone where it feels like a mutual relationship or something is possible, that's where you want to tune in, and that's where you want to do some hard work. For people who have been socialized to believe that they are superior and it's the only thing they have to hold on to, it's a devastating thing to have to let go of it, but it's not impossible. It's not impossible, because every human wants belonging. And I think when we let people know, like, actually this superiority complex you have, my friend Makani Timba recently had me rethink this from, she's like, I don't even say white supremacy anymore. I say white sociopathy. But she's like, once we recognize it that way, that's like, that is a sociopath way of thinking of the world. And it's something that you want to recover from, heal from, like, you need to extract from yourself and your system so that you can belong, because there's no belonging if that's the work that you're doing. And I want to be an embodiment of belonging for other people to witness. Like, I have a community that I deeply know I belong to. I know they belong to me, and we're surviving together. And it's so beautiful. And I'm so happy. And I know I'm one of the freest humans that has ever lived. And I want that to be like a beacon, right? That's like, this is also possible, but you have to set down that myth of supremacy, and you have to set that idea of total innocence or perfection. All that stuff has to go. And you have to be a real person with mistakes and let other people with mistakes love you.
Awesome. Any quick share, Maggie?
Yeah, I really appreciate those reflections. I think the questions I'm left with is what to do with those who refuse, or like, is like, is exclusion of those who are deeply committed to not seeing you part of the inclusion of those who are?
I don't think that it's exclusionary to set a boundary around a shared value, right? And I think that sometimes we're like, oh, like, I'm like, if the value is you have to be able to have some mutual dignity and respect in this space, and someone is like, I can't do that, then that's a boundary, right? Okay. then you get to go somewhere where you can practice what you want to practice. The beautiful thing about this earth is it's massive and abundant. There literally is enough room on this planet for everyone to go and have their own experience. The only experience so far that we've found that is not compatible with this earth is that of domination, right? So that's the piece where I'm like, I'm like, if you really want to sit with all your white friends and just have a white life, you can do that. You just cannot be over me, right? So White Island, have a blast, right? But that piece of domination is the part that I think the earth is telling us very clearly, there's just no room for that on this planet. But again, there's a whole universe out there.
Awesome. Thank you, Maggie. And yeah, I think Adrienne has to leave now. Any closing thoughts or final words you'd like to leave us with?
Well, I appreciate this conversation with y'all. I hope it was of use. And these are good questions. Keep asking them. You know, I don't know more than you do about any of it all. So just keep asking yourself. I'm a huge fan of writing questions and then writing the answers to them down in my journal, you know, like interview yourselves often. You'd be surprised what you'll find. So thank you all.
Beautiful. So on behalf of the Stoa, thank you so much for coming today, Adrienne, and then check out the book, Emergent Strategies, and many other reads that she has. So for, yeah, the next session I will plug, or not in the next session, Flow Game, the art of crafting powerful questions. I think if you vibe with this session, you'll vibe with that one. So you can check that out, and other sessions at thestoa.ca. So that being said, everyone, thank you so much for coming to the Stoa today.